Consciousness is the seed of rebirth, the vital role of Thức in Buddhist philosophy. Have you ever wondered what truly carries on after death? If the body returns to dust and the breath fades into silence, what remains? In the eyes of Buddhist wisdom, the answer is both simple and profound: Thức, consciousness. But don't mistake it for a soul. This isn't about something fixed or eternal. Thức is not a passenger on the journey, it is the journey itself. A flowing stream of awareness, shaped by karma, forever moving from one life to the next. It doesn't cling, but it continues. It doesn't possess form, but it leaves an imprint. Like a flame passed from torch to torch, it carries the essence of who we were and who we might become. In the sacred chain of dependent origination, Thức is the silent messenger. It receives the echoes of past actions and plants the seeds of future becoming. It is the unseen thread that binds lifetimes together, not with chains, but with causes and conditions. To understand Thức is to glimpse the inner mechanics of rebirth, the secret language of karma, and the deep truth that who we are is not a fixed point, but a flowing process. In this journey, we will explore 5 profound insights into Thức, insights that might just shift the way you see life, death, and everything in between. 1. Consciousness, the bridge between death and rebirth. In the Buddhist view, death is not an end, it's a transition. And the one element that travels through this transition is Thức, or consciousness. When the physical body ceases to function, when the heart stops and the brain no longer sends signals, that's not the conclusion of our story. Instead, something formless, subtle, and deeply powerful continues, the stream of awareness. Unlike Western concepts of an immortal soul, Buddhism teaches that Thức is not a static entity. It has no shape, no color, no permanent identity. And yet, it endures. It carries with it the imprints of all our past actions, our karma. This karmic energy doesn't float randomly into the universe. It seeks out, almost magnetically, a new life, a suitable environment, a womb, a condition that matches the vibration of the past. Think of it like this: imagine your mind is a traveler, and death is simply a border crossing. Your luggage is your karma, the actions you've accumulated, and your passport is your Thức, imprinted with every thought, word, and deed you've ever carried out. The next destination? Determined entirely by what you've packed. This teaching changed how I view loss, especially after the death of a loved one. I used to think of death as a disappearance, a tragic ending. But now, I see it as a transformation. The person hasn't vanished, the Thức has simply moved on. They're not gone, they've just taken a different route. And I wonder, with a quiet heart, where have they arrived now? What new form are they exploring? Let's say a man lives a life filled with compassion, generosity, and mindfulness. At the moment of death, his consciousness, calm and radiant, naturally gravitates toward a peaceful rebirth. Perhaps he is born into a loving family, or even into a realm beyond human suffering. On the other hand, a person who harbors deep hatred and resentment may die with a heavy, tormented mind. That burdened consciousness seeks out a rebirth that reflects those inner storms, perhaps in a realm of confusion, pain, or violence. In essence, Thức is the silent witness of our entire inner world. It doesn't judge, it simply records, and it brings the consequences with it. This is why, in Buddhism, our thoughts and intentions are so vital. Because they don't die with us. They live on in our Thức, and they shape the next chapter of our existence. 2. In the chain of dependent origination, Thức is the crucial link. In Buddhist philosophy, life doesn't unfold randomly. Everything arises due to causes and conditions, woven together in a dynamic, interdependent web. This principle is beautifully laid out in the teaching of the 12 links of dependent origination, Paticca Samuppada or Thap Ni Nan Duyen, the Buddha's deep insight into how suffering arises and how the cycle of rebirth is sustained. Let's briefly look at the 12 links. Ignorance, avijja/vo men, volitional formations, sakra/han, consciousness, via/Thức, name and form, namarupa/dan sak, 6 sense bases, sayatana/luk nap, contact, phassa/suk, feeling, vedana/tho, craving, ta/I, clinging, upadana/Thursday, becoming, bhava/hue, birth, jati/sin, aging and death, jarmara/Lao Tu. Among these, consciousness, Thức, is the third link, and its position is far from arbitrary. It serves as the bridge, the karmic conveyor, between the volitional acts of a previous life, Han, and the arising of a new psychophysical being, Dan Sak. In other words, Thức is what receives the momentum of the past and transfers it into the conditions of the future. To better grasp this, imagine a river. The karmic seeds, the intentions and actions from our previous lives, are like leaves dropped into the current. Thức is the water, carrying those leaves downstream until they arrive at fertile ground where new life can sprout. Without this flowing consciousness, the karmic momentum would have nowhere to land. Or take a simpler analogy, lighting one candle from another. The second flame is not the same as the first, but something essential has been transferred: heat, energy, continuity. That's Thức. This realization dramatically shifts how we understand life and death. Consciousness isn't a fixed entity, but neither does it disappear. It's not you in the way you might think, not a permanent soul, not a self that can be grasped, but rather a stream of awareness conditioned by everything that came before. It is the silent witness of your karma, the carrier of memory without content, identity without a name. When the Buddha spoke of this, he wasn't giving us a mystical theory, he was offering a diagnosis. Thức helps explain why we are born the way we are, where we are, and into what circumstances. Nothing is random. Our mental formations from past lives, Han, create a resonance that attracts a matching rebirth, and Thức is what carries that resonance forward. When I first studied the 12 links, I was stunned by how scientific it felt, not in the material sense, but in its precision. There's no room for blind belief. It simply asks you to observe how the mind works. I began to notice how even a single thought leads to a feeling, then a craving, then an action, and how that action leaves an imprint. I remember attending a funeral where someone said, "He's gone now. Nothing remains." But in light of this teaching, I felt differently. Something did remain. His Thức, the subtle energy of all his thoughts, choices, and emotions, had not ended. It had moved on, seeking the next place to bloom. Picture this: two people die at the same moment. One passes with a mind filled with anger, resentment, and fear. The other dies with compassion, forgiveness, and clarity. Though their bodies expire simultaneously, their Thức, conditioned by entirely different karmic tones, flows in opposite directions. One might take rebirth in a place of confusion or suffering, the other in a peaceful, elevated state. This isn't punishment or reward. It's resonance. Just like a tuning fork vibrates in harmony with certain frequencies, consciousness finds its next birth in alignment with its inner state at death. Thức is not a soul, not a ghost, not a shadow. It is the current that carries the wave of karma from one life to another. It's why the mind we cultivate in this very moment matters more than we often realize. Because when this life ends, our Thức continues, and it will take with it whatever we've poured into it. So in every thought, every breath, every action, we are writing the script of our next becoming. 3. Consciousness sustains name and form, the birth of body and mind. Once Thức, consciousness, enters the cycle of rebirth, it doesn't float aimlessly. It seeks a foothold, a condition through which it can manifest once again. That foothold is what Buddhism refers to as name and form, Namarupa/Dan Sak, the inseparable pairing of mind and body, or more precisely, the mental and physical components that make up a living being. But Thức doesn't simply observe this formation, it initiates and sustains it. Without consciousness, there is no awareness. Without awareness, there can be no interaction with the world. Thức is what gives life to the emerging organism. Buddhism explains that rebirth begins the moment consciousness enters the union of sperm and egg, the father's seed and the mother's blood. It is this moment, where Thức meets physical matter, that the blueprint for a new life begins to take shape. That life starts as Dan Sak, a formless mental sensitivity, Nama, and physical materiality, Rupa. Nama includes feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention, the basic mental functions. Rupa includes the emerging body, the cells, tissues, and organs that will eventually form the six sense bases: look, nap, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. It's easy to assume we begin existing when the brain forms or the heart beats. But according to Buddhist thought, the subtle formation of identity begins when Thức sustains Dan Sak. That is the birth of you, not as a person with a name and a past, but as a stream of becoming that has found a new home. This isn't just poetic. It's profoundly practical. It means that the you sitting here now, with thoughts, emotions, memories, and a physical form, is the result of Thức merging with Dan Sak. Without consciousness, none of this could arise. I remember holding a newborn in my arms and being overwhelmed by a strange, deep sense of wonder. This tiny being, so fresh and soft, had eyes that seemed to look through time. In that moment, I didn't just see a baby. I saw a traveler. A consciousness that had arrived with stories I would never know, shaped by intentions I couldn't see. That moment changed the way I view birth. It's not just a biological event. It's a karmic arrival. A re-entry. A continuation. Think of a seed planted in soil. The Thức is like a beam of sunlight. The seed already contains potential, but it needs light to grow. The moment sunlight hits it, transformation begins. Roots emerge, stems rise, leaves form. Similarly, once Thức enters the fertilized egg, Dan Sak begins to unfold. Life takes shape. But the quality of the soil and the strength of the sunlight matter. Just as karmic imprints influence the kind of life that will emerge, so too does the consciousness affect the trajectory of development, physically, emotionally, spiritually. As Dan Sak evolves, it gives rise to the six sense bases, look, nap. These are the doors through which consciousness will perceive the world: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought. And from these senses, the next links in the chain of dependent origination arise: contact, suck, feeling, though, craving, I, and so on. But all of it, all of our interactions, attachments, and experiences, begins with that initial contact between Thức and Dan Sak. So what does this mean for us? It means that who we are is not a product of random chance, nor are we blank slates. Each life is a continuation of mental momentum, shaped by causes we may not remember but are intimately living. Our body and mind are not separate, they arise together, are sustained together, and eventually fade together. And Thức is the silent architect behind it all. To understand this is to awaken to the sacredness of life, not in a dogmatic way, but with the realization that every being we meet is a consciousness in motion, a traveler in the great cycle of becoming. Just like us. 4. Consciousness is not an eternal soul. One of the most radical and liberating insights in Buddhist philosophy is this: consciousness, Thức, is not a soul. It is not a fixed self, not an unchanging I that floats through lifetimes like a ghost wearing different masks. Instead, Thức is a dynamic process, fluid, impermanent, and dependent on causes and conditions. It continues, yes, but it is never the same. In many spiritual traditions, the soul is imagined as the core essence of a person, pure, permanent, and untouched by change. Buddhism gently but firmly disagrees. The Buddha taught the doctrine of anatta, no self. This means that what we call self is a convenient label, a temporary gathering of 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Among these, Thức is the most misunderstood. Because it continues across lifetimes, people assume it must be a soul. But this is a mistake. Consciousness survives not as a static identity, but as a stream, always in motion, never fixed. The Buddha gave a beautiful analogy: imagine one flame lighting another. The second flame arises because of the first, but it's not identical. There's continuity, but not sameness. This is how Thức moves from one life to another, carrying karmic energy, but not a permanent essence. Think of a wave in the ocean. You can point to it, admire it, even name it, but is it separate from the ocean? Is it fixed? Of course not. It rises, moves, and falls based on wind, gravity, and current. Tuk is like that wave. It appears real and it functions, but it has no permanent identity. It is not separate from the ocean of causes and conditions that give rise to it. This truth can be unsettling. We want there to be something that's me, something that endures. But Buddhism offers a more profound comfort. Liberation doesn't come from clinging to what we are. It comes from letting go. When we see that we are process, not possession, we begin to flow with life instead of fighting it. I used to struggle with this idea. If there's no soul, then what continues? What makes me, me? But over time, I realized the question itself came from fear, the fear of disappearing, of being nothing. Then I encountered a simple Zen saying, when I let go of who I am, I become what I might be. That hit me deeply. The Buddhist view of Tuk doesn't deny continuity. It denies fixation. And that's what makes freedom possible. If we were bound by a permanent soul, our fate would be sealed. But because Tuk is changeable, shaped by karma, intention, and awareness, we can grow, awaken, and transform. Suppose a person spends their life angry, bitter, and destructive. Their consciousness becomes conditioned by these emotions. At death, that energy doesn't vanish. It continues, but not as a soul carrying memories or identity. It continues as a vibration, a momentum. It finds a new life, perhaps one full of conflict or confusion, because that's what it resonates with. But if that same person had gradually transformed, practiced mindfulness, compassion, and self-awareness, the consciousness would carry an entirely different quality. It might find a more peaceful or elevated rebirth. Not because of reward or punishment, but because that's what it has become. This, to me, is incredibly empowering. We are not stuck. We are not doomed by some eternal self. The stream of consciousness is always flowing, and with awareness, we can gently steer its direction. The non-eternal nature of Tuk means we are not bound by our past, nor are we guaranteed a future. Life is fragile, ever-shifting. But that fragility is also our freedom. In every moment, we are becoming. In every moment, we are reborn. You don't need to wait until your next life to be someone new. You can begin right now, with this breath, this thought, this action. So let us remember, Tuk is not a soul. It is a stream, shaped by karma, flowing through lifetimes, but never fixed. It is not who we are, but what we do. And in this realization lies the key to awakening. When we release the illusion of a permanent self, we don't lose ourselves, we finally become free. 5. Consciousness plays a decisive role in rebirth. In Buddhism, rebirth is not a random lottery, it is a result. And one of the most critical factors that determines where and how we are reborn is the state of our consciousness at the moment of death. The teachings are clear. Your last thought, your final state of mind, becomes the seed of your next becoming. Consciousness, Tuk, doesn't just passively receive karma, it actively seeks out a new realm of existence based on the qualities it carries. Like a magnet, it is drawn to environments that resonate with its frequency. Death, in Buddhism, is not an end, it is a moment of incredible spiritual significance. At that precise juncture, everything that has been stored in your mental continuum begins to ripen. Karmic imprints, latent tendencies, memories, and habits all rise to the surface. The state of your mind in that moment becomes the determining factor in where your Tuk will go next. If your final moments are filled with fear, hatred, or attachment, your consciousness will carry that turbulence forward. If they are filled with compassion, clarity, or letting go, your Tuk will resonate at a different level and seek a more peaceful rebirth. Imagine two people dying in the same hospital room. One passes away clutching resentment, replaying grievances, and unwilling to let go. The other dies whispering words of forgiveness, with a heart softened by gratitude and peace. Though their bodies expired in the same setting, their destinies diverge dramatically. The one consumed by anger may find their Tuk drawn to a realm of suffering, perhaps as a being tormented by confusion, hostility, or darkness. The one who dies peacefully may find rebirth in a higher realm, among those who cultivate wisdom and kindness, or perhaps even a life with spiritual opportunity and clarity. This is not superstition, it is energetic resonance. Just like a tuning fork vibrates with specific frequencies, your Thức tunes into the next life that matches your final state of consciousness. This teaching made me rethink everything about how we live and how we die. I used to think the quality of my death would be determined by luck, a peaceful setting, the absence of pain, the presence of loved ones. But Buddhism turns the focus inward. It is not the external conditions, but the internal state that matters most. And this gives us power. It means that preparing for death is not something we do at the end of life, it's something we practice daily. Every moment we spend cultivating patience, mindfulness, loving-kindness, we are shaping the Thức that will carry us onward. Every time we choose peace over reaction, we are training for that final breath. In Tibetan Buddhism, practitioners place great emphasis on the bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth. Advanced practitioners train for years to keep the mind calm and aware during the dying process so they can consciously direct their Thức toward a favorable rebirth or even liberation. It's said that some realized masters die with a gentle smile, entering the next world like a diver entering still waters. Why? Because their Thức is clear, unburdened, and free. We may not be advanced yogis, but the principle still applies. The quality of our consciousness now will determine the quality of our transition later. Many people believe that death is the end of agency. But Buddhism teaches the opposite. In that final moment, your consciousness is free from physical limitations. It is light, mobile, and sensitive, and its direction is set by the momentum of the heart. If we live our lives unaware, driven by ego and habit, we may find ourselves unprepared when the body fades. But if we live with intention, aware of the power of the mind, then death becomes not something to fear, but a gateway we are ready for. Consciousness is not only the bridge between lives, it is the compass. It chooses the path ahead, guided by the thoughts and emotions we've cultivated moment by moment. In the final breath, there is no judge, no divine hand picking your fate. There is only you, the raw truth of your mind. And whatever that mind holds most dearly, that is what continues. So the real question is not what happens after I die. The real question is, what is the quality of my mind right now? Because that is what determines everything. Throughout our exploration of Buddhist teachings on Thức, consciousness, a profound truth has emerged. We are not static beings. We are not defined by what we appear to be, nor are we bound by the roles we play in this fleeting moment of life. Instead, we are streams of becoming, flowing through existence, shaped by intention, carried by karma, and guided by the subtle currents of awareness. Let's pause and reflect on the 5 key insights. 1. Consciousness is the bridge between death and rebirth. When the body dies, consciousness continues, carrying the imprints of our past, not as memory, but as energy seeking a new form. 2. In the 12 links of dependent origination, Thức is the karmic carrier. It receives the momentum of previous actions and sets into motion the formation of a new life, proving that nothing arises without a cause. 3. Consciousness sustains name and form, the root of body and mind. The moment it enters the womb, life begins to unfold, both physically and mentally. Without Thức, there would be no experience of living. 4. Consciousness is not a permanent soul. It is not a self, not a fixed identity. It is impermanent, interdependent, and always changing, and because of this, transformation is possible. 5. Consciousness determines rebirth through the final state of mind. The quality of our awareness at the moment of death is the compass that directs us to the next phase of existence. These teachings are not abstract philosophy. They are called to live with awareness. To realize that our every thought, every emotion, every choice is forming the shape of our Thức, and therefore, forming the shape of our future. The way we love, forgive, listen, and let go, it all matters. Not just morally, but cosmically. Because this consciousness we carry will not disappear when our name is forgotten. It will continue. And what it becomes next begins with how we live now. So ask yourself, what am I cultivating in my heart today? What energies am I feeding in my mind? Am I preparing my consciousness to bring peace or suffering to the next world? We are not powerless travelers on this journey. We are gardeners of the unseen, planting seeds in the soil of our mind that will bloom in lifetimes to come. The Buddha once said, "With our thoughts, we make the world. But perhaps more accurately, with our thoughts, we make our next world." Let us live, then, with that quiet awareness. Not in fear, but in freedom. Not in grasping, but in clarity. Not as victims of fate, but as conscious creators of a path that leads to awakening.